take a minute and talk about it and his work in the context of what I think we all ought to be reflecting on now. To me, it really, I think, requires that you think back to what Henry David Thoreau talked about years and years ago, before many of us saw the great work that Aaron was doing. Henry David Thoreau asked if a citizen should ever, for a moment, or in the least degree, resign his conscience to the legislator. And I think about this when I think about Aaron, and not just as a legislator, but also as a dad. Because from time to time, I read our 5-year-old twins a book called Henry Climbs a Mountain. And the book was inspired by the night that Thoreau stayed in jail. In the book, a fuzzy bear named Henry wants to climb the mountain, but he had only one shoe. On his way to the shoemaker's shop, the tax collector stopped him, and Henry refused to pay the tax because he objected to an injustice that had been tolerated by the state. He preferred to go to jail rather than paying the tax. He would not resign his conscience. Now, as Henry lay in that white jail cell, he still wished that he had his other shoe. So he took crayons from his pocket and drew the shoe on a white wall. Then he drew a flower with a hummingbird on it. Then he drew trees and imagined himself climbing a mountain. He climbed up waterfalls. He marched through the clouds. At the top of the mountain, Henry imagined he met a traveler coming up on the other side. The traveler sought freedom from the injustice of his side of the mountain. He and Henry sat and they talked, and they laughed, and they sang songs. And Henry noticed that the traveler had no shoes and asked him where he was going. The traveler said, as far as the star in the north. That's a long way, said Henry. I ought to take my shoes. The traveler put on Henry's shoes. He got up and waved. Thank you, my friend. Henry then hiked all night down the mountain. He tripped. He caught his foot in a rabbit hole. He walked all night and entered into a small room in the dawn. And just then the door opened to wake him up. He was back to what we call reality. In the door was the tax collector. The tax collector told Henry he was free because somebody had paid his taxes. When asked how it felt to be free, Henry said, it feels like being on the top of a very tall mountain. And then he went off to the shoemaker's to buy a new pair of shoes. For me, Henry's story, Aaron's story, is much like Henry's. Henry hacked his jail cell. He had to help people, to give shoes to a traveler, to call out injustice through civil disobedience. Mention was made of the fact that Henry worked closely with our office on a number of issues relating to freedom, relating to innovation, relating to civil liberties. We had a chance, in effect, with a lot of you, to march towards a common star and what it represented to us and to others. I'm not going to forget Aaron, and I know you won't either. During his short time on earth, Aaron Swartz made an eternal difference. For that, we give him our thanks tonight and reaffirm our commitment to continue his march for freedom and a more just world. We're going to talk tonight about how Aaron was a hacker. He hacked to promote openness and to promote innovation. When Aaron hacked, a poorly written criminal law called him a dangerous criminal. Common sense and conscience knows better. unjust law. Because unjust law will not save. Aaron, like Henry, is now on the top of a very tall mountain. And those of us who had a chance to see his extraordinary work are forever honored. And that is what we reflect on.
Thanks. I didn't know Aaron as well as many of the people here. I first encountered Aaron. Aaron was reading my work and would send me questions all hours of the day and night. And I think I responded to at least a significant subset of them. They were often long, detailed questions, good questions. And then I recall I wrote a book that I took advantage of his and Professor Lessig's Creative Commons, made available Creative Commons copyright. And after I put it up, I get this note from Aaron saying, how come you don't have this available in an HTML format? And I do sometimes get busy, and I'm sure I wrote back to him fairly annoyed, saying, well, no one on my staff has time to make it available in an HTML format. So Aaron, of course, responded saying, well, I'll do it. We sent him the material, and the next day we had it in HTML format. I met Aaron. He came to Washington shortly thereafter, and it was hard. It was, I should say, impossible not to be impressed with both his intelligence, but also his commitment. I mean, that was really striking. There's a lot of intelligent people in Washington, no doubt about it. But Aaron really did stand out in the sense that here was a young man who was really committed, and he was asking because he really wanted to learn. He really wanted to know. He took everything very, very seriously, and he wanted to make this a better world. And I don't think anyone who knows him could question that. And that's why it's very, very difficult not to be angry about the circumstances of his death. I mean, we look at this, and we look at the situation the country's in, and we know that this is a Justice Department that couldn't find anyone to prosecute with the tens of billions of dollars of fraudulent mortgages that were passed on to the But they apparently have the time and resources to threaten a young man with decades in prison for trying to make academic articles freely available over the internet. That's, I think, an incredible story that, as I say, it's very, very difficult to think about and not be angry over that. If we think about it in context, I mean, we all know Aaron was a brilliant young man, brilliant computer whiz. And it's sort of striking. We contrast him, say, with those who use their brilliance, say Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg, who personally enrich themselves. That clearly was not what Aaron was about. Aaron was about trying to make this a better world. And I think we all should take that to heart, and we can best honor Aaron by redoubling our efforts. Some good does occasionally come out of this place, the financial reform bill that Ben mentioned. We could point to a few things. It can happen, and Aaron was an optimist that way. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I think when we do things, we should try to be optimistic even at a time like this, because things can change for the better. Aaron believed that, and we should honor that.
Aaron believed very much in open access to information, and maybe in that spirit, if someone has left their wallet somewhere in the room, if they retrieve it now from the checkout desk right outside, it doesn't have to go through the Capitol Police system. And it's Nathan Wyatt. Nathan, congratulations. But for all of us, we all benefit from Aaron's commitment in that way and from so much that Aaron did. Aaron sort of burst into public consciousness across America for at least very nerdy people who followed such things. When he was 14, he helped create the RSS specification, really simple syndication, which, if you're not familiar with computers, it's sort of like the World Wide Web was a map where in each particular location, it would have signs pointing to where you could find other websites. But RSS was the postal service. So suddenly, a website could actually subscribe to material from another website and send it to you. So if you're ever on a website and it has a list of articles from some other website, that's there because of RSS. It was this really cool thing. But believe it or not, Aaron actually existed for 14 years before he did that. He didn't just appear through an interplanetary kind of vortex. And the person who knew him for all of that time and 9 months more, and I think feels this as much as anyone alive, what's happened is his dad. So I'd like to welcome Bob Swartz. Thanks for being here.
This is Aaron Swartz' dad.
This is just also completely surreal for me. And I first want to thank everyone. As a family, we're completely humbled and overwhelmed by the response to what we view as an absolute cataclysm. I want to thank everyone for what they're doing in Aaron's memory. And we are deeply touched and hope that we can affect real change so that this kind of tragedy can't happen again. As a family, we are still in shock, numb, and in denial. This simply could not have happened. We are crushed. I remember vividly the day Aaron was born. It was one of the happiest days of my life. It was a miracle, a beautiful and healthy boy. And what a child. Aaron was precocious and learned to talk at an early age and had an incredible visual memory. I remember the day my wife, Susan, called me and said, Aaron had asked, what is this free family entertainment in downtown Hyde Park? And she asked him what he was talking about. And he said, Mom, it says here on the refrigerator. He had taught himself to read when he was 3. He was able to read the early readers we gave him, and his ability improved quickly. We enrolled him in a school for gifted children, and he took to computers at an early age, using the Mac for simple games and perhaps as early as 2. We were one of the early users of the internet and before browsers, and we were one of the first users of Netscape, the first commercial browser. We learned to program very early, and it seemed easy for him, perhaps around the time of 3rd grade. I need to look, I still have the computer with his first program on it. I need to dig it out of the basement and figure out when he wrote it. Because of this tragedy, I've been talking to a number of reporters, and sometimes I'm baffled. One asked me, where Aaron got his interest in improving the world? To us, this is just part of who we are, part of the school Aaron went to, the synagogue he attended. He came from his grandfather, who was deeply involved in Polis that won the Nobel Peace Prize. Another asked, why are you so curious and interested in so many things? This just seems natural to us, to be obsessed and passionate to understand how the world works. Aaron is but one of 3 brothers, each just as bright and able as Aaron. But Aaron is dead, and the result of a government that is killing our best. The smart, the curious, are the seeds which have made this country great. Steve Jobs started in business selling advice for a phone company. Bill Gates used to hardware construction equipment and used computer time from Harvard and the Albuquerque public schools that was at best sketchy. Edwin Land Polaroid his original research by breaking into the lab at Columbia. Mark Zuckerberg downloaded without permission Harvard data to start Facebook. Bob Noyce, who founded Intel and invented the integrated circuit, stole and slaughtered a pig from the mayor of Grinnell, Iowa, which was in Iowa a felony. We lionize these people and companies. We don't prosecute and persecute them. What Aaron did was more along. He wanted to make the world a better place. For this, he was hounded to his death out of government. Aaron was sensitive and fragile, but he was thrown into a system that was cruel and vindictive. Carmen Ortiz says that what her office did was appropriate. It was not appropriate after Aaron agreed to surrender voluntarily to arrest him, strip search him, put him in a cell, bring him before the judge in handcuffs, and leave him in the cell for hours after he posted bail. All because he had the chutzpah not to accept the outrageous plea agreement they offered. This was cruel and vindictive. It was wrong to use a vague law that was written before the internet existed, which gave the prosecutor immense discretion to threaten him with years in prison and immense fines. This is why we need to change the CFAA so this can't happen again. But the facts show that Aaron was innocent. The prosecutor used coercive methods to get him to plead guilty and to go to jail without being able to see the evidence against him. It was only recently that we were able to see the facts that prove this. But the prosecutor wasn't content to use his immense powers against Aaron. He had to go further, and we believe he went over the line. That is why we need this investigation, so these abuses don't happen again. We have to be able to ask the question, are we a country that wants to encourage our best and brightest, the rebels and the misfits, the ones who see things differently, and change our world for the better, or do we want a country that crushes them? We have to face the fact that we have a criminal justice system that is broken, and when 95% of federal indictments end in plea agreements, an indictment becomes a guilty verdict, there is no longer a presumption of innocence. Aaron's death was the result of a criminal justice system which has morphed to destroy our best and brightest. We need to change the CFAA and investigate and find out what happened so that this will never happen again.
Progress, then I'll invite Congressman Grayson and other members who'd like to speak to come up and do so. I actually met Aaron through my own unsuccessful run for Congress in 2010, back when I was a Rhode Island state rep, and when the PCCC was one of many important organizations that Aaron founded, or helped found, which has worked with many people in this room today, and endorsed my effort. He became a fixture at our campaign office, rigging up cheap ways to do polling and robocalls, and helped to give the uphill effort a fighting chance. And he was the sort of presence that gave one a sense of peace and of purpose, even in the midst of the incessant dialing for dollars and the grunt work that comprises the bulk of the candidate's working hours. If Aaron cared about your cause, you knew that you were doing something right. That work on the congressional campaign quickly transitioned into demand progress, and Aaron's conception of that initial petition in opposition to the Combating Online Infringements and Counterfeits Act. We called it the Internet Blacklist Bill, and I remember him telling me, "Siegel, you might have lost that race, but I still need you to help me change the world." Together we made the transition from the streets of Providence to the halls of Congress, trying to make sure that people care about our new org and our cause, and they do now. But back then, it was so far from it. We spent a week trouncing around Hart and Dirksen, meeting with a few offices that would even give us the time of day, dropping off hard copies of our new petition, more than 300,000 signatures strong, dozens of pages long, even at 6-point typeface. A year or so later, lawmakers and the American public would learn why we were so concerned about that bill and protect IP and SOPA thereafter. And then a year after that, in recent weeks, the whole world would come to understand the extraordinary roles Aaron played in building and then in defending the internet as we know it. And Aaron was indeed a passionate advocate for access to information and for a free and open internet. He believed in these things not just for their own sakes, but moreover as a means towards the even deeper end of building a world defined by social and by economic justice. He was brilliant, but what made him even more special was how he resisted the impulse to presume that he alone was responsible for his brilliance, or should benefit therefrom. And he wasn't a techno-utopian. He told me something once like, and I've been fumbling for the right words over the last few weeks, "David, you have to understand, I might seem a little antisocial, a little misanthropic sometimes, but don't worry, whenever there's a problem, I'm always looking for the utility-optimizing solution to it." His work was to make the world a better place for everybody. He was a sort of communitarian, somebody who was deeply aware of our world's injustices, and who understood the constant struggle that's necessary to begin to remedy them. He devoted himself to that cause, and he, at least in part, succumbed to it. One of the roles that I've played over the last few weeks is to try to take all of the outrage at Aaron's death and the desire to make something meaningful come from it, to take all of that and to turn it into productive, directed activism and policy work. And that would be a much easier thing to to achieve. It would be much easier to discern a fitting tribute to him if Aaron had been a normal sort of activist, somebody who cared passionately about just a narrow issue or two that had touched him personally. But Aaron wanted everything. He wanted to change the whole world. And more than anybody else I've known, he stood a chance of actually achieving that. We can't do everything that he would have, but we can still do what we can, and we will. And we'll do it in a way that's unusual by the norms of modern American politics. Aaron was an ideologue, but not a rogue partisan. He was a progressive. He cared about ideas and about doing what was right, far more than he cared about party stripe. And this meant that he was willing and even excited to work with conservatives, libertarians, Republicans, when it forwarded a cause that he cared about. He understood the respects in which the standard single-axis, left-right paradigm didn't always hold. And he had been heartened to see so many people on the right, including many Republican lawmakers, rallying to support the cause of CFAA reform and to review his prosecution, just as he was happy to work with them as he fought to stop SOPA, or to oppose bailouts, or to audit the Federal Reserve. We'll hear from a number of lawmakers and policy advocates, conservatives among them, who respected Aaron's work, saw him as a friend and ally, and who want to make sure that we do right by him and so many causes for which he cared so deeply. And so I'll begin by introducing Congressman Grayson, who represents Florida's 9th District. He's an attorney who in the early 90s co-founded an internet and telecom company. He then worked as an attorney specializing in whistleblower fraud cases aimed at Iraq war contractors. He's also our second left-leaning former Scalia clerk to speak tonight. Aaron worked in Congressman Grayson's office as an intern in the wake of the economic crash. So with that, Congressman Grayson.
Aaron worked in my office as an intern and had a quality that I found unnerving, which is that he could come up with better things for him to do than I could come up with for him to do. Time and time again, I would give him something to do, and he'd say, is it okay if I also work on this other thing? And this other thing turned out to be much more important than anything I could come up with. And I learned to live with that. I learned to live with that shortcoming, which I took to be a shortcoming of my own, not one of his. The other unnerving quality that I found in him was the fact that when he would conjure these assignments, they actually came to fruition. An unusual phenomenon here on Capitol Hill.
Yes.
He gave himself something to do. I recognized that it was very worthwhile. I let him do it, and it got done. He was a remarkable human being. Another thing that I found unnerving but also very endearing about Aaron was that Aaron wanted to rock the boat. Now, we all hear from a very, very young age, don't rock the boat. And I would venture to say that of the 2,000 languages spoken on the planet, probably every single one of them has an idiom in that language for the term, don't rock the boat. And yet, Aaron wanted to rock the boat, not just for the sake of boat rocking, but for the sake of improving the lives of ordinary people. And that's a beautiful, wonderful quality. We're talking about somebody here who helped to create Reddit, an important worldwide service, at the age of 19. Honestly, somebody who probably could have spent the rest of his life in bed, ordering pizzas, and leaving it at that. And yet, he didn't. He continued to strive to do good. Good as he saw it. And that's a rare quality in people. Many of us, we just have to do our best to get through the day. That's the way it is. Many of us struggle to do that. Very few of us actually can think big thoughts and make them happen. But Aaron was one of those rare people. And he was willing to take the heat for rocking the boat. Now, sometimes when you rock the boat tries to rock you. And that's exactly what he encountered, right up until the end. And it's a sad thing that that's the price that you have to pay. For some of us who rock the boat, we end up losing our property. For some of us who rock the boat, we end up losing our freedom. For some of us who rock the boat, we end up losing our families, and in Aaron's case, And yet, he was willing to face the facts and to let that happen, to keep striving, to keep struggling, to keep trying to shake things up. Aaron's life reminded me about a different life that came to the same end. It's the life of Alan Turing, a brilliant mathematician who lived in England, born 100 years ago. Alan Turing was the greatest mathematician of the 20th century. He not only invented the Turing machine, which is the basis for all modern computing, but Alan Turing also broke the Nazi codes during World War II and allowed the English and the Americans to defeat the Nazis. And you would think that someone like that would be cherished. Someone like that who, if he managed to have a full life, might have won 1 or 2 or 3 Nobel Prizes. But instead, in fact, he was vilified because he was a homosexual, which at that point in England in those days was illegal. And I'm sure that at that point in England in those days, there were people who said, well, the law is the law. And if you disobey the law, then you should go to prison. And because of that, because his boyfriend turned him in, Alan Turing was convicted of perversity, sent to prison, given the choice between spending hard time, years and years of his life, in prison instead of doing the mathematics that he loved, or alternatively to accept estrogen injections. Well, he took the estrogen injection choice, and that broke not only his body, but his mind. And he found that he couldn't do the thing he loved the most, mathematics, any longer. So after 2 years of this, Alan Turing committed suicide. And who lost? Well, Alan Turing lost. But so did all of we. We lost as well. All of us who would have benefited from that first and second and third Nobel Prizes that Alan Turing had in him, and that Aaron Swartz had in him. We're the ones who lose. If we let our prejudices, our desires to restrain those with creativity, if we let that lead us to the point where that is restrained, then going back all the way to the time of Socrates, what we engage in is human sacrifice. We sacrifice their lives out of the misguided sense that we need to protect ourselves from them, when in fact it's the opposite. Our lives have meaning. Our lives have greater meaning from the things that they create. So we're here today to remember Aaron, and also to try to learn from the experience. To understand that prosecution should not be persecution. This morning I reached into the closet, randomly took out this tie, and wore it. And I have a sense that sometimes things are connected in ways that aren't exactly obvious. It happens that this tie is a painting of Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh, someone else whose life ended all too soon. And in Don McLean's song about Vincent van Gogh, it ends this way. They would not listen, they're not listening still. Perhaps they never will. It's time to listen. Thank you.
I got to meet Aaron several times, and always appreciated his insight into organizing and getting people together around a common cause, which he's even doing in depth here today, what a catalyst this journey has been. And when we lose someone like Aaron in life, or anybody who's important to us in our own lives, it's always a question we ask, why? Well, how did this happen? Who's to blame? Why did he die? Who should be held responsible? And there's certainly plenty of blame to go around. Of course, we'll never know what demons he faced that only he knew. But they were certainly made worse by many others, including
prosecutorial discretion in a way that was a perversity of justice, even had it now led to this tragic end. The success of her pursuit would have led to an almost as tragic end of decades in prison for this young man. An administration that did not rein in a prosecutor who was using her discretion for the wrong purposes. And yes, in Congress, ourselves, myself included, that had laws on the books and still has laws on the books that allow this sort of travesty to occur, and yes, occur again to someone else if we do not take corrective action. So what I hope comes out of this terrible tragedy is a policy change, is an awakening, is something that will prevent this type of travesty from occurring to anybody else in this country. This is a personal loss that is felt dearly, first and foremost by his family and friends, and certainly by those of us who held him as an acquaintance as well. But it is also a public loss, the public loss of a mind that had many more contributions that it made and had many that it would make in the decades ahead, that are robbed from us, in part because of our own failure to act and prevent this travesty from occurring. I join those who mourn the loss of Aaron, and I will continue to work every day to encourage an environment and an internet that welcome innovation, welcome the contributions of men and women like Aaron across the world, and policy changes that help make information a little more free, something that we will all benefit from across the world. And Aaron's life was very much testimony to this great idea, and many chapters that will be told in the future.
Sometimes you wonder what you're doing in a room. In this case, I don't wonder at all. At the beginning of tonight, people talked about Aaron as a progressive activist. I fit in with that. Gary Shapiro fits in with that. Jared Polis fits in with that. Not because we come from exactly the same party, or because we always reach the same conclusions, but because, to be honest, sticking to the man, something from my generation, resonates in everyone here tonight. The whole question of whether or not in government we trust isn't a question that's hard to answer. Our Constitution, our upbringing tells us in God we trust. Even if we're atheists, we still look and say, I'd rather trust God than my government. At least I hope that's the way we feel. Because ultimately, trusting a government is inconsistent with our founding words, we the people. Aaron understood that. He and I probably would have found ourselves at odds with lots of decisions, but never with the question of whether information was in fact a human right. Now, our copyright laws were created for the purpose of promoting useful works, not hiding them. Our government and every asset of the government belongs to the American people. Not one piece of federal land is off your ability to walk through it at pleasure unless there's a valid reason to prohibit that. That principle, I think Aaron and I would always agree on. The principle that we own our government, we own all the rights and privileges that God gave us, and ultimately, knowledge belongs to all the people of the world unless there's a really valid reason to restrict it. And I think that's the reason Jared and I, Jason Chaffetz, Zoe Lofgren, and others fought so hard against SOPA and HIPAA, SOPA in the House, because we could see that this was yet another, in this case, beginning in America, but a global effort to restrict the question of, well, who gets
always take responsibility for protecting copyrights. Now, I respect copyrights. I really do. But I also recognize that that promotion is hampered if we begin chiseling away at the access to information and the freedom that the internet has given us. Now, there's a generation difference, and Congressman Grayson is left, but I knew Don McLean's various songs, and I could go through some of the same ones from that American Pie album. But in my day, we didn't have an internet. When I worked in government at the end of my career in the military, we were just beginning to use what became the internet. But as a young man, when I needed to sell my thin mints so I could go to the summer camp, I would get to an apartment and I would start ringing doorbells. And I would ring as many doorbells as it took for somebody to buzz me in. Now, I don't believe in most cases one person buzzed me in knowing that I wanted to sell them thin mints. Ultimately, I got in the door and I went from door to door, asking if they would buy thin mints, and many did. I was a pretty pitiful young man. But I broke the law in a mean old way. Every time somebody goes out trolling for information on the internet, one could say they're potentially exceeding that. They're beginning to tip away at it. And yet, would we in fact have the ability to search the internet if somebody didn't search the internet and then compile it and make it available to us? And product after product, and innovation after innovation would be stifled unless we assume what Aaron assumed. That curiosity, as was said earlier, that curiosity is about you get to go anywhere, anytime, and look at anything, unless there's a valid reason to stop you. And if, in your curiosity, you go over the line, it's appropriate to be told you went over the line. It's appropriate to, in fact, receive some level of punishment prescribed under the law. But the crime and the punishment have to fit. Everyone here tonight knows that the crime and the punishment did not fit. As our committee investigates it, it's going to be to try to find out how and why. We suspect we know some of it had to do with ambition, big prosecutions, smart people being brought down. That's regrettable, because the best and the brightest in our prosecution, our U.S. attorneys, should care about disposing of small cases quickly and big cases properly. And this wasn't a big case, and we know that. Now, Congressman Laughlin, when she was here, companion in the Senate, we are going to work out restraints on this kind of abuse in the future. And that restraint will be intended to ensure that harmless acts are treated appropriately, even if in fact they remain against the law. They have to be treated as the harmless acts. The fact I'll really just close with one thing. If everyone who ever tried to guess a combination on a safe, or a password, or looked at a diary endlessly trying to decide whether or not to open it when they saw it there, or a drawer that was half open, was brought up on charges based on the maximum value of what could have been the damages, that our jails, which are already too full with too many sad cases that need to be treated and not punished, would in fact be beyond overflowing. And so the issues that Aaron has left behind and the causes that he believed in are ones that I believe will live on in this Congress. And it is very fitting that we're here tonight, eulogizing Aaron and at the same time making a bipartisan commitment that many of those issues are going to be doubled down on because of his sacrifice.
Social change as an activist, but ultimately more like a social scientist. Aaron cared about getting it right. He cared about getting it right for code. He wanted to make sure activism worked. Aaron said once, the revolution will be A/B tested. We believe in optimization. And if you A/B test two legislative strategies, one of which involves getting a majority of the Republican House and the Democratic Senate versus one that doesn't, the one that passes both houses of Congress stands a much better chance of getting signed into law. So this stuff is really important. Aaron found a little subculture of the world called rational altruism. It's a community where there's a bunch of philosophers and some economists and some random people who are interested in that, who argue a lot about what is the most rationally altruistic thing you can do. And Aaron was as thoroughgoing a rational altruist as I've ever met, who wasn't just focused on where to give a dollar most effectively or how many dollars to give. He was focused on how do you use a whole life's work most effectively in service of humanity, in service of a better world. He took his own life without finishing that work. We have a right to be frustrated with him for that, angry with him for that. But he wasn't defined by that moment. His life is defined by all the other moments. And that's where we have to finish this work. Aaron was brilliant. He was also capable of the most profound empathy of anyone I've ever met. I think that's one thing that made him a great advocate for change, that he could see in other people's feelings. He could feel all the pain that they felt. He could feel the joy that they felt. And he brought that into how he lived his life. He brought that into his friendships, and he brought that into his relationships. One of his greatest joys in the world was Taryn. I introduced Aaron and Taryn the first time about a month after I first met Aaron, because Taryn had been organizing technology and sort of teams of pollsters from around the country to run electronically driven sort of robo-polls. And pollsters will tell you that robo-polls are less accurate, but Taryn had to figure out how to calibrate the robo-polls to match them with telephone polls by humans until the robo-polls were just as accurate and figure out which House seats were competitive long before anyone else had figured it out, because you could poll so cheaply. And Aaron, I told Aaron the story. Taryn was working with me at the time. I told Aaron the story. He thought it was great. So he asked me to introduce them. I introduced them, and soon enough, I think in a few weeks, he built the same tool himself and was running polls across the country. He did things like that a lot. The second time I introduced them was in the fall of 2010. It was the midterm elections. As much as we love our Republican friends and all these battles, Aaron was involved in helping Democrats win. And Aaron and I arrived in D.C. to volunteer in the Democratic National Committee on the new media team, kind of on a whim. I think Aaron was sick at the time. He was also very busy. He had no business being there, but he showed up and he started rewriting the code for the tool for volunteers to call voters in swing states and ask them to show up at the polls, a team that Taryn was running at the time. And I introduced him the third time in the next February. I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, and during the Wisconsin uprising, I was getting really excited. I was talking to Aaron about it, and Aaron was very impulsive and excitable. And Aaron said, "Hey, we've got to go to Wisconsin." And I said, "Yeah." And we decided we would get in a cab and go to the airport and find out if there were any cheap tickets flying out soon. And if there were, then we would decide whether to buy a ticket and go. So we did, and there were, and we did. And we didn't hack, we didn't have a plan, but we showed up in Wisconsin, and Taryn was there. And some other friends. And I have these photographs of Aaron holding signs, there were all these signs that he thought were so funny, and marching and chanting, and then thinking about how you could use this energy, all of this energy that people had for social justice, how you could build movements out of this. I think other people introduced them too. At some point, something stuck. And Aaron 2011 to work with me on a project. The first day that the second day of that project, he was indicted. And the shadow had sort of descended over his life. And every day, every Monday, he would have to take a bus back to Boston to go and show up in court so that he hadn't fled. But during all that time, he was building this amazing relationship with Taryn. And part of the story of Aaron's life that we won't know is the kind of family that he would have had, the kind of kids that he would have had. I know it was my baby. Aaron loved Taryn. I like to thank Taryn for being here today.
Thanks, Ben. The theme of tonight is remembering Aaron. I've been doing a lot of remembering lately, telling anecdotes over and over journalists. So I want to tell a story that I haven't told yet, that I was remembering earlier today. Last summer, I was teasing Aaron about the fact that he never gave me presents or did anything, for surprises for me. And he pointed out that I didn't do that either. So we agreed that we would each plan a surprise date night for the other person. Or more precisely, I proposed that we each plan a surprise date night, and the other person, he didn't object very strongly, so. I told him to meet me at the West 4th Street subway, and I took him to the Comedy Cellar. It was a gesture to our habit of watching a movie together. It was fun, though a little bit overwhelming, I have to say. We argued a lot afterwards about the endemic sexism and racism in live comedy. Aaron didn't seem to be planning a surprise date. He certainly hadn't mentioned anything to me. But I thought I should give him some time instead of nagging him about it. And then the next weekend, he dragged me along to a lecture by one of his friends, Edward Tufte, the famous data visualization guy. Edward Tufte spoke at Aaron's Memorial Service in New York. The lecture wasn't actually even on data visualization. It was Tufte was speaking about his sculptures of Feynman diagrams. And we stayed for an hour afterwards chatting with him and figuring out the combinatorics of the Feynman diagrams that he had on the wall. And then when we left, Aaron asked me how I liked my surprise date. I was a little incredulous. First of all, how was I supposed to know that he'd actually planned for it to be a surprise date instead of just deciding afterwards that it counted? Second, I like data visualization and Feynman diagrams as much as the next girl, but it's pretty bad. But Aaron wouldn't budge. He felt like he had fulfilled his duty. And that's Aaron. He's stubborn. He's always looking for loopholes. And he was always asking for forgiveness instead of permission. Aaron can be infuriating, and he made a lot of mistakes. Like the terrible mistake that he made 3.5 weeks ago. But Aaron was the brightest star in my life, and he was one of the brightest stars in America. You've heard the laundry list of his accomplishments. He had so much more to do. Maybe he would have founded the next Google. Maybe he would have finished the book he was working on and written a dozen more. He would have been the best father in history, and I can only imagine how lucky our grandchildren would have been. And I know for sure that he would have fought every day for the rest of his life to make the world a better place. Aaron asked for forgiveness, not permission, like when he downloaded over 4 million JSTOR articles. And JSTOR forgave him. But MIT and the U.S. Attorney's Office wouldn't. He was indicted less than 2 months after we started dating. The case hung like a cloud over our entire relationship. At the beginning, I didn't know what was going on in his life. I knew there was something happening. He called it the bad thing. And I knew that I was a good distraction for him from the bad thing. And then a few weeks later, he called me. I was at a practice. He was in D.C. He was in Boston. And he said, the bad thing might be in the news tomorrow. Do you want to hear it from me, or do you want to hear it in the news? I said, well, I'd like to hear it from you. And he said, well, I downloaded too many journal articles and I'm being indicted for it. And I paused and I said, it doesn't actually sound like a very big deal. He said, well, they want to make an example out of me. But I guess it's not like anybody has cancer. In the end, it kind of was like that. The first time I met Bob and Aaron's mother, Susan, was the day, well, actually the night before Aaron was indicted. Aaron called me and said it was going to happen the next day, and that he just thought I should know. I said, do you want me to come? He said, oh, it's up to you. Typical Aaron, not wanting to ask for help from anyone. So naturally, I, of course, went to Boston, flew there, and got in around midnight, and Aaron's parents arrived around 1 a.m., and Aaron took me over to the hotel room, and it turned out they didn't know that I existed. So I met them at 1 a.m. the night before the indictment, and I spent 5 hours in the federal courthouse with his parents while he was being processed. The only time that I can remember Aaron ever turning away affection from me was in December, just a little bit, I guess 2 months ago now. We were at the federal courthouse for a hearing, and we came out of the hearing, and I tried to give him a hug, and he pushed me away. And he said, not in front of Steve Hyman. I don't want to show Hyman that. This man who was destroying his life. The case hung like a cloud over our entire relationship, but I never considered giving up on the relationship because of the case. You only meet a man like Aaron a few times in a lifetime, and only if you're really lucky. If worst came to worst, and Aaron had gone to prison for what the prosecutor said they would have recommended at a trial, probably 7 or 8 years, I knew we'd probably have to break up. But to me, the chance of a lifetime with Aaron was worth the risk of heartbreak. Last week I had a nightmare. Aaron and I were living in a house together. We were living our lives, working, laughing, loving. And then someone started coming after us. In my dream world, I didn't know who it was. The cops, the mafia, I didn't know. Just that someone was coming for us, trying to destroy our life together. In my dream, it seemed as if we could just fortify the house, we'd be safe. We started blockading the doors with furniture. We were nailing 2x4s over the windows. We were scared, but we were working together. It felt possible to beat the bad guys. I paused in my dream for a few moments to make breakfast, Aaron's favorite, scrambled eggs with Swiss cheese. When I turned around to take it to him, Aaron was dead. Time stopped. I couldn't understand what had happened. It just seemed impossible. In my dream, I didn't know who the bad guys were. Who it was who was doing this to us. But the worst part of this dream is that it wasn't a nightmare. I clawed myself awake with an overpowering sense of sorrow and pain. But my nightmare was a reality. And in reality, I do know who did this to us. It was the Massachusetts U.S. Attorney's Office, wielding the full force of the U.S. government. It was Steve Hyman and Carmen Ortiz wielding the outdated and vastly overreaching Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. We live in a country where the criminal justice system is so out of whack. We go after people like Aaron. We have laws like the CFA that give virtually unbridled power to prosecutors like Steve Hyman. We've built structures that reward U.S. attorneys like Carmen Ortiz for threatening people like Aaron with decades in prison and millions of dollars in fines. And this for an alleged crime where the only possible victim, JSTOR, had asked for the case to be dropped. It's not just Hyman and Ortiz. Prosecutors are selected in this country for their capacity for justice, and they certainly aren't selected for their capacity for mercy. Because of the CFA, prosecutors have the power to destroy the lives of people like Aaron, and they use it. It doesn't matter whether they understand the internet. It doesn't matter whether they understand Aaron's generation of innovators. Until the CFA is amended, the best and brightest of America will be afraid to innovate for fear of prosecutors leaders who understand only their own petty power. I want to be clear, the CFAA reform is necessary, but it's not sufficient. Our country has 3% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prison inmates. Our legal system is primarily a machine for producing plea bargains, not ascertaining guilt or innocence and assigning appropriate punishment. CFAA reform is necessary, but it's not sufficient to restore justice to our country. But CFAA reform is a start, and it's a critical one. Aaron's family and I will never get him back. Our country and our world will never get him back. But you, the members of Congress in this room, you have the power to make sure this doesn't happen to the next Aaron Swartz. You have the power to make sure that the next Aaron Swartz's life isn't cut short by a prosecutor's ambitions. You have the power to make the world a place where the next Aaron Swartz will have children and grandchildren. We'll publish books. We'll fight wrongs in the world and develop the technologies of the future. Aaron's family and I will never get him back. For now, I welcome the nightmares about Aaron. I savor them despite the desolation I awaken. I cherish them, even if Aaron and I spend the whole dream running from the bad guys, because they're the only time I get to talk to him. They're the only time I get to hold his hand. I want to give my deepest thanks to the members of Congress who are in this room or came earlier. Senator Wyden, Senator Warren, Congressman Grayson, Congressman McGovern, Congressman Issa, Congresswoman Schakowsky, Congressman Polis, Congressman Lothrin. I want to thank you for investigating Aaron's death and the case the prosecutors brought against it. We must demand the full cooperation of the Department of Justice so that Aaron's family and I can understand fully what happened. We'll never get Aaron back, but hopefully this investigation can bring us some closure. And I implore you to please pass Aaron's law. America is a better place because Aaron lived. The world is a better place because Aaron lived. And America and the world are a worse place because Aaron died. The least we can do is make the country safe again for the next generation of Aarons. Thank you.
We're concluding for the evening. If you've been watching online, if you're here, you can sign up to help make these changes at help.rememberaaaronsw.com. That's help.rememberaaaronsw.com. If you sign up for the sheets coming in, you'll get an email asking you for more help on things. You can unsubscribe if you'd like. We'd really appreciate it if you help instead. This is the end for this evening.